Ninjani, my name is Bekezela. Ngiyalamukela ku the Girls Table Talk Show where we talk about issues that affect young women. Kulezi nsuku sithi thina we want to instill a culture of transparency, integrity and accountability kuma young women ethu. Athi mina I will not take part in corruption. But namhlanje sikhuluma nge-whistleblower protection. We've had our young women saying ama issues e corruption akhona kuma communities ethu but siyesaba ukuthi si report. So I want to find out from uMnumzane Effie ukuthi ikhona yini i-whistleblower protection njalo ithini, ikhona imithetho yini e-protecta ama young women ethu nxa sebethe ba-reporta issues to do with corruption. But ngizaqale nginikeze uMnumzane Effie ithuba lokuthi azitsho ukuthi ungubani before we delve into the conversation yethu yanamhlanje. Over to you, Mnumzane Effie.
Oh, thank you very much. My name is Effie Ncube. I work on analyzing public policy to see what it means to people. I analyze legislation and its impact on people. By and large, that is what I do.
Okay, siyabonga Mnumzane Effie, sesisazana. So njengoba bese ngitshilo ukuthi ama young women are raising issues ukuthi bona bayesaba ukureporta issues to do with corruption but akhona kuma communities abo. So ngifuna ukuzwisisa ukuthi ngathi mbala i-National Anti-Corruption Strategy ithi there should be a whistleblower protection. So ngicela ukuzwisisa ukuthi i-whistleblower protection bill ithini, or are there any laws akhuluma about i-protection yama whistleblowers labo abathi bona bakhulume ngama issues ukuthi kule corruption enje siya protectwa yini kumbe ayikho imithetho enjalo?
Oh, thank you very much. Let's start with what is existing. The first thing that is there to protect whistleblowers, that is people that report acts of corruption or violations of laws and gross abuse of office and so forth, is the Constitution. That's the first thing. The second thing is the Prevention of Corruption Act, which deals with the prevention of acts of corruption. The second act that deals with that is one that pertains to evidence in a criminal trial. There is that protection, but all those do to a certain extent in a very limited way. That is why the National Anti-Corruption Strategy envisages a standalone, comprehensive Whistleblower Protection Act, which we do not have at the moment. And also that is contemplated under the UN Convention Against Corruption, the African Union Convention Against Corruption, and the SADC Protocol on Corruption. All of them envisage a very comprehensive, a very detailed, standalone Whistleblower Protection Act. And therefore, at the moment, people are not sufficiently protected. And that is why we need that act. We need that protection so that people can report acts of corruption, acts of violations of the law without fear of reprisals, intimidation, and anything that is directed against them.
I'm not sure what then is a whistleblower bill. What's in the whistleblower bill?
Well, first and foremost, it is yet to be circulated for public consumption. It is going to be introduced in this parliament, the 10th session of the Parliament of Zimbabwe. So that is when people are going to interact with it quite a lot. There are changes that can still be made before it goes to Parliament. So we can only sort of envisage or want something to be there. And there are certain standards that are set out, what we call 20 international best practices, against which we measure whistleblower protection acts, like we do with the one that exists in South Africa, in Botswana, in Namibia, in Uganda, in Tanzania, in Ghana, and in Rwanda, in the African continent. Those are the countries with standalone whistleblower protection acts. When we measure those, you find that some score 4 out of 20, like in Botswana, 14 out of 20, like in Namibia, others even lower. So we'd want our act at the end of the day to score 20 out of 20. that is the measure of its success at the end of the day. But beyond having an act protecting the rights of the people that report on acts of corruption, people must know about it. They must know the procedures that they must follow in order to report acts of corruption and to get the protections that are outlined in that particular act. So for now, we can only say we want it to look like this. And if I say we want it to look like this, these are the following things that are very important. It has to provide very comprehensive protections against reprisals, whether they are criminal or civil. It has to punish those that go against whistleblowers personally. It has to provide people with the protections within the workspace and outside the workspace, as well as the protection of their families. That's very, very important. It has to also make it a point that it's very clear that people are protected and they know about that, and at the end of the day, they are able to secure the protections and the rights that are outlined in the law. But it's 20 of those international best practices that we have to work on to make sure that they are there in the law. If it falls short of the 20 out of 20, then it is not sufficient. We still have to work harder as people of Zimbabwe to make sure that there is that sufficient, effective protection of whistleblowers.
Thank you so much, Mnumzane Effie. Njoba benchilo ukuthi National Anti-Corruption Strategy ithi yona kumele kube le whistleblower protection. So I did a podcast ngikhuluma nge-National Anti-Corruption Strategy, and ku-podcast yami I did mention the-issue ye-whistleblower protection. Ngikhuluma lo someone who said, yes, abantu khathesi nxa be-reporter issues of corruption uyathola ukuthi kuba kalutshwana, and people who report sometimes uyabe report efuna ukuba kwazi ukuthi what do I get in return, abanye in terms of money, ukuthi then ngingareporta ngizatholani. So umbuzo wami usekuthini, do people understand the importance of ukuba yi-whistleblower? Do they understand the importance of ukukhuluma out about i-corruption, ukuthi how does it benefit us? Or umuntu ucabangela ukuthi as long as I'm going to benefit, and as a result sigcine singakhulumi ama-issues e-corruption but si-affected. So do people understand? Ikhona yini indlela where people have been taught about ama-mechanisms of reporting corruption, lokuthi why is it important ukuthi njengabahlali sisukumele phezulu and make it our point ukuthi you report these issues?
We are not yet there as a country. We are still working towards that. As I outlined earlier, that we do not as yet have a standalone comprehensive whistleblower protection act. Once we have that, it will be important to go out there to communities and let them know the protections that they enjoy in terms of that particular act. But even before then, it is important that we detail quite a lot for the people through awareness campaigns, so that they know at the end of the day that corruption is destructive. It takes away resources that otherwise would be used for education, for healthy care, for roads, for service delivery of one kind or another. So fighting corruption is part of ways of ensuring quality service delivery. So people should link acts of corruption to deprivation of specific rights and services that are due to them. That's very, very important. Whether there is a specific reward or compensation that you get as a person, at the end of the day, the country benefits out of your reporting acts of corruption. There is also a debate internationally whether the right way to deal with corruption from a reward or compensation standpoint of view is giving people financial rewards for what they have said or reported as an act of corruption, or to compensate people. We still await to see what the bill is going to be saying on that one. But at the end of the day, people will have to be given incentives beyond just awareness and knowledge to report acts of corruption.
it benefits izikolo zethu because ngenxa ye-corruption kugcina kusiba nzima ukuthi sithi achieve equality education. Like I said ekuqaliseni ukuthi young women are saying thina siyesaba ukureporta ama-issues of corruption, but i-corruption ikhona in our communities, and as women njengoba umnumzane u-Effie ekhuluma ngokuthi it affects i-service delivery, and njengabantu abangomama when service delivery is affected thina si-affected kakhulu ngoba umntanami nguye wesikolo, nguye umntwana osothola i-poor education. So how can we empower ama-young women lawa ukuthi bathi speak out njalo maybe sikhulume la ngama-fears ukuthi kanti ama-fears abalawo ukuthi bareporte kuyini njalo how can we remove these fears and empower them to speak out against the corruption?
Yes, before I get into that, I think it is important to say out of the laws that have been passed worldwide, the ones that the anti-corruption fighters have found that they are very comprehensive and we need to copy a lot from them is one, the United States law that protects whistleblowers, that is the Whistleblower Protection Act, one in Australia. So we would await and see and campaign for that our laws go as close as those and even beyond the protections that are offered by the US and Australian laws. The fears that people have when it comes to acts of corruption, first and foremost, let's take into account the fact that a Whistleblower Protection Act largely deals with the internal happenings. That is, if you know that there is an act of corruption that is taking place, there is a violation of the law that is taking place, or that is likely to take place, or that has taken place. And also it deals with issues beyond acts of corruption. Let that be very clear, because it also deals with threats to security and public health. For instance, if there is something that is being done by people that may contribute in a very serious way to threats to public health and safety, the Whistleblower Protection Act will deal with those. So it's not limited only to just acts of corruption. It deals with a broader array of issues and so forth. So they fear that at the end of the day, they will be targeted after they have reported acts of corruption. Quite recently in South Africa, a whistleblower was shot, was killed after they had reported. In the DRC, 2 activists who disclosed the acts of corruption were charged and sentenced to a very serious sentence for what they did in absentia. So these are present and very serious issues that have been found throughout the world. So what the Whistleblower Protection Law has to do, it has to assure people that you can go and report acts of corruption without fear, and then your identity can be protected. If you want your identity to be protected, confidentiality is assured, and you are protected from reprisals, dismissal from work, for instance, if you reported something to do with work. Because in most cases, the Whistleblower Protection Act deals with the corruption that takes place in government. It protects government workers. So there has to be a balance between that particular act, for instance, and the provisions of the Official Secrets Act in our situation, which prohibit disclosure of certain information. So to the extent that we want it to be effective, it will have to deal with the provisions of the Official Secrets Act so that they don't act as a limitation to its effectiveness. So people have a fear that they will be targeted, that they will be intimidated, that they might actually be killed, because acts of corruption are, in most cases, really organized by organized crime. People that have guns, people that have the power to harm you. But also they are committed by people that are senior to you, who can dismiss you from work, who can follow you at home and harm you. So the Whistleblower Protection Act will have to provide those protections in order for people to feel free. But it's not enough just to have a law. In Uganda, their Whistleblower Protection Act is not being sufficiently utilized. And it's the same with other African countries to use them, because people are not aware of those provisions out there. So you need, in addition to just to coming up with that law, to go out there and make sure that people have sufficient understanding that there is this law, why is it there, and how they can utilize it to fight corruption.
Ngiyabonga kakhulu Mnumzane Effie. Zimbabwe is said to have imithetho, ama-acts are powerful, but we have a challenge when it comes to implementing these laws. So we are talking about the Whistleblower Protection Act ezabakhona. So umbuzo wami ukuthi, as young women, as Zimbabweans, can we trust the Whistleblower Act lanxa ingaba khona ukuthi sibekwazi ukuthi yes, ilama provisions athi, but can people trust umthetho wona lo nxa usukhona, especially njengoba ngisitsho ukuthi kulama weaknesses emthetho silayo but kunzima ukuthi silandele in terms of uku-implementa kuba phansi. So can people trust babe lakho ukuthi hayi mhla umthetho ukhona definitely sizasukumela phezulu, we will trust ukuthi umthetho lo uzaba implemented kahle njengoba ukhuluma ukuthi kubo DRC people are dying. eSouth Africa ukhona umuntu oyabe ebulawela ukuthi bakhulumile about corruption.
The protections that are there can only be stronger if you have an active citizenship or citizenry. The citizens of the country need to stand out in large numbers and make it a point that the protections of the law are realized, so that our laws are implemented, that our constitution is implemented. That is the responsibility first and foremost of the people of Zimbabwe, before we get to a stage where we deal with people that we call the duty bearers, those that are in government, for instance. So we have a responsibility, young women, young people, young and old, men and women, to make sure that our laws are implemented. Laws don't self-implement. They don't self-enforce. So we need to make sure that we are out there to demand that to happen. We need also to make it a point that those that are in power understand that the people of Zimbabwe want their laws to be implemented, effectively implemented, that is. So it's not something that after we have a law, we can go back and sit at home and say we are done and dusted, everything is done, we have no problem, unless we go out there and demand that those laws be enforced.
Maybe my last question would be, singadimanda njani? Does it mean we engage our MPs? Abayibo labo futhi singabathembi ukuthi some of them are corrupt, some of them don't even understand their reason yokuthi sabakhethelane, because they forget to even come back to us. But how do we demand ukuthi nxa i-act sikhona kumbe imithetho efakwayo, we make sure ukuthi i-implemented, and as the citizens we are protected, fully protected?
The starting point is to make it a point that you elect the right people that are going to listen to your voices, that are going to prioritize service delivery and the fight against corruption. And so the fight against corruption does not begin at the Whistleblower Protection Act. It starts way before that. It includes the way you decide who to vote for. You need to vote for the people that are committed to the fight against corruption, so that they are able to enforce the kind of laws that you need, so that they are able to come up with the kind of laws that you need. Without that, some of the things may not work out. So there are many ways of ensuring that at the end of the day, you have the right people that are willing, because the political will is part and parcel of the fight against corruption. If you have people in power who are not willing, who are not ready to fight corruption, then corruption will thrive, regardless of whether we have all the laws that we have. So it's important at the end of the day that we work out those things to make sure that we utilize every opportunity, elections, petitions, meeting your public officials one-on-one, petitioning parliament, and so many other strategies, including petitioning and engaging political parties, to ensure that at the end of the day, the laws that we have are there and corruption is fought in a very safe way for the citizens of Zimbabwe.
Thank you so much, Mnumzane Effie. Okunye engikunanzelelayo ukuthi lathi as young women, as citizens, we need to be active because abanye bethu don't even understand the national budget, we don't understand the Auditor General report. Kanti yikho lapho kumele sibale and follow up ukuthi sibone ukuthi kanti i-corruption ikhona kumbe hayi kuma-duty bearers ethu, kuma-local councils ethu, ukuthi sibekwazi ukuthi imali eyabuyayo isebenze kahle, ukuthi kumele sithi follow up. That's the only way ukuthi sithi fight corruption, because nxa unga-understand ukuthi kwenzakalani okokuqala, you can't talk of corruption unga-understand ukuthi what's happening. But umbuzo wami wokugcina ngokuthi ama-mechanisms akhona khathesi to report i-corruption iwaphi. Ake sithi ngoba i-whistleblower protection ingakabi khona, how can we report corruption and feel protected as young women? Because like I said, young women are crying emakhaya ukuthi bakithi kunzima, siyabhadaliswa izimali ukuthi ebhadalani lizathola umsebenzi singawutholi, uthola umuntu lwana nangiyana lokho ezihambela but udla imali zethu thina imisebenzi asiyitholanga. So how can they khathesi report corruption and make sure ukuthi they are protected?
Yes, as I said earlier, the current protections are in the Constitution, very limited also those that are provided for under the Prevention of Corruption Act. There are also protections that are there under the Criminal Procedure and Evidence Act, and they are very limited. So I can't really suggest that people are sufficiently protected at the moment. They are not. But there are procedures that can be followed to report acts of corruption, including straight to the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission. Depending on the act of corruption, also you can report within your company, within your department. But there are no protections that are able to protect the people to the extent that is contemplated internationally, so that it is 20 out of 20 in terms of international best practices. Those protections are not there. They are not akulandlela abantu abavikelwe ngakhona khathesi. So you may report the act of corruption within your company, within your department, uzithole usu-victimized. You find yourself victimized, you find yourself dismissed from your work, you find yourself transferred to another emakhaya, to a rural area. So there are no protections. That is why it is important that this 10th Parliament of Zimbabwe passes a very comprehensive, standalone, very effective Whistleblower Protection Act. And that is the only way really that we can say we have sufficient protections. But beyond that, it will require to be well enforced. It will require the existence, a climate of the rule of law where the laws matter, people are protected. Without that, we cannot go anywhere, even with the acts that we have, and even after we have the Whistleblower Protection Act.
Ngiyabonga kakhulu nginanzelela ukuthi as young women we are vulnerable to corruption. Sasikhuluma ngendaba yokuthi nxa siyathatha abo license ngisenzani, kukhona lapha lawo othi noma ngaze ngikade ngingafuni ukukhipha ibribe uzithole usukhiphile, because it seems like we've normalized ukuthi kumele nxa ngithola any service ngibhadale, kanti akumelanga kube njalo. We want young women abale integrity who are saying mina I will not be part of corruption. So njengoba umnumzane echilo, the parliament le i-10th parliament should make sure ukuthi baya iyenza sure ukuthi the Whistleblower Protection Act iyaba passed and ibe implemented. Lathi futhi njengabantu we should be active and make sure ukuthi abantu esabakhethayo play their part ukwenzela ukuthi kungabi le poor service delivery, because we are the most affected makusiba le corruption. Until next time, from the Girls Table, siyabonga kakhulu mnumzane Effie. Please don't forget to follow us on our social media pages. Go X, it's table_girls. Go Facebook, it's the Girls Table. Go Instagram, the.girls table. Kanti sikhona la ku YouTube. Ungaphonga the Girls Table. You get to see our talk shows, our podcast, and get to learn about the work that we do. We also have a website, www.thegirlstable.org. Until next time, siyabonga kakhulu. Let's join hands and fight corruption. It starts by you reporting khona lokho kwenzakalayo within your community noma kuyinto encane. We've heard abanye abantu besithi nxa siyakukha amanzi so kuthiwa letha imali engaka, especially nxa kungela amanzi sisike emabhawuzeni, faka $2 ukwenzela ukuthi ube ngu number 1. nxa usuyikhiphile $2 ukuthi ukuthi lawe usuyibe yingxenye yomuntu oyenza i-corruption. Until next time, ngiyabonga.